Hi, how you doing? Justin Sandercoe here. Welcome to lesson 1 of the guitar pickup with BBC Radio 2. In this first series of lessons, I'm going to be helping you learn guitar, whether it's for the first time or the first time in a long time. So before we actually get into playing the guitar, let's have a look at the guitar anatomy. So the first thing you need to know about the big part of the guitar is called the body of the guitar. That's the part that would normally rest on your leg. And leading out from the body, we have the neck. Okay, and the neck leads to the head or the headstock. Now your guitar should have 6 strings. If it doesn't, perhaps you've broken one, you might need to change that. So make sure you've got 6 strings on the guitar, and underneath the strings you're going to see these little bits of metal, and these are called frets. Right at the end of the neck we have this thing called the nut, which is normally a bit of bone or plastic, and we count the frets up from the nut. So we've got the nut, the first bit of metal up from that will be the 1st fret, then the 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 4th fret, etc. At the end of the headstock we have the tuners. Sometimes you'll have 6 on one side, sometimes you'll have 3 and 3. It doesn't really matter. Important to realize that when you're turning them anti-clockwise, that's going to be tuning the string up. Now let's talk a little bit about how to hold the guitar. So the first thing, the body wants to sit on your right leg, assuming that you're a right-handed guitar player. If you're a left-handed player, it'll sit on your left leg. When you put your arm should kind of hold the guitar, and it's also really important that you don't let the guitar lay over. I see a lot of beginners kind of trying to look at their fingers like that, and it's really bad for your neck and your back. So guitar nice and snugly into your body, sit up straight and relax. If you're new to guitar and you're looking at buying one, it's really important that you understand the 3 main types. Now what I'm holding in my lap here is a steel string acoustic guitar. An acoustic guitar meaning that it's self-contained, it makes its own sound. So we don't need an amplifier. You can hear. Beautiful to play, however they can be a little difficult to play when you get a budget instrument, because the strings can be a little bit far away from the fingerboard, and then you have to press really hard, and pressing your soft fingers onto thin metal strings can get a little bit painful. So some people opt for a different type of acoustic guitar, which is called a classical guitar. Now these have got nylon strings, so they have a slightly softer sound. Because they have nylon strings, they're a lot easier on the fingers, so a lot of people start off on these, especially young children. However, what I really recommend, and what I think is the best option if you're just going out to buy your first guitar, is getting yourself an electric guitar. Now, what I've got here, this is a real classic. This is a Fender Stratocaster. Now, electric guitars also have steel strings, but the strings tend to be a lot closer to the fingerboard, so it's a lot easier to press the strings down when you're doing your first chords. Now, even though it's an electric guitar, it makes plenty of sound for you to play by yourself. It's quiet, but sometimes that can be a good thing because it won't upset your neighbors at all. You can practice as much as you like and it won't even disturb the people in your own house, let alone the neighbors. If later on you really find you're enjoying guitar and you want to play with some other people, then you might need to get an amplifier. But otherwise, I would recommend getting yourself an electric guitar as your first instrument. Now one really important thing you need to learn how to do is tune your guitar, because an out-of-tune guitar can sound really horrible. Now it's a skill like everything else, and learning to tune by ear takes quite a lot of practice, so I would really strongly recommend, if you're a beginner, that you get yourself a tuner. Now you can get these days tiny little tuners like this that just clip onto the headstock of your guitar, and once they're on there they tell you if your guitar's in tune. They even tell you what string you're playing. To tell the truth, the one I use most is the one that's built into my phone, because I've always got it with me and it's super accurate, and there are many available for different smartphones. So I'd recommend getting yourself a tuner app would be probably the way to go. Now it's also important that you know the note names of the open strings. That is, the names of the notes that you play when you play a string without any fingers on it. Okay, so they would be from the thinnest string, the note E, B, G, D, A, and E. Now the easiest way to remember them is to make up a little rhyme, of which there are many. You could make up your own. The one that I use is "Every boy gets dizzy around L," about the famous Elle Macpherson supermodel, you know. But there's another, a very common one is going from the thickest string, could be "Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie." So it doesn't really matter which way you go, from the thinnest string to the thickest or thickest to thinnest, but make up your own rhyme or find one that really resonates with you so that you remember the open string notes. When you're just starting to learn, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. It's like there's so much to do, so many different things. But remember, even the pros were beginners once.
Things that I found difficult at the beginning everything, but I mean, it would hurt my hand a lot to play for more than a certain amount of time. So I think the trick with that is don't play for too long, just play in short bursts and regularly, and build up the calluses on your fingers, and then you can hold the strings down for longer.
Before we look at our first chord, you really need to learn how to read chord boxes, because that's how we show you where to put your fingers on the guitar neck. And a chord box is a visual representation of the guitar neck. So if I hold my guitar up like that, and now you're looking at the chord box, you're going to see the 6 vertical lines, and they represent the 6 strings. And the thicker string is going to be on the left-hand side, and the thinner string will be on the right-hand side. At the top of the chord box, you'll see a double line, and this represents the nut. And underneath that, the lines represent the frets. At the top of the chord box, you might see some X's and zeros. The X's mean that you won't play that string, and a circle means that you will play that string, but with no fingers on it. Next up, you're going to see that there are some dots, and these dots are where you're going to put your fingers, and next to those dots, or in the dots sometimes, you'll see finger numbers. The index finger is number 1, the finger we use for driving is number 2, the ring finger is number 3, and your little finger is number 4. Okay, it's finally time to play our first chord, and the first chord we're going to be looking at today is going to be the D chord. Now, to start with our D chord, we want to place our first finger in the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. So I'd recommend you get the string first. So starting with the thinner string, that will be string 1, move it over, that will be string 2, over again, and now we're on string 3. And it wants to go in the 2nd fret. So remember, right next to the nut would be the 1st fret, and we want to move it up into the next one, which is going to be the 2nd fret. Now, where you place your finger is also pretty important. If you put your finger right at the back of the fret, you often get a bad note, and you have to press really hard to try and get a good note. So really what you want to do is try and get that finger up as far as you can so it's right next to the fret. That way you can press the least amount and still get a good sounding note. So that's the first finger. Now, second finger is going to go down in the 2nd fret of the thinnest string. Okay, now you should just find that it goes in naturally a pretty good place if you put it down there. It's not going to go too far back because that would be awkward. So again, making sure you get it right up close to the fret on the thinnest string. Now the 3rd finger is going to go down in the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. Now what a lot of people find is that they can't stretch out that 3rd finger to get it up near the fret straight away. They tend to get it right back here with the 1st and 2nd fingers, which tends to get a little bit of a funny note. So if you find that your 3rd finger is right back there, try and stretch it up. You will find it a little bit difficult, but it just takes a little bit of practice to get your fingers lingered up, and you'll have that up there in no time at all. So now that you've got the chord shape, it's time to check the notes one at a time. So if you look at your chord box, you're going to see that the thickest 2 strings are not played. So if we're counting from the thinner string, string 1, 2, 3, 4, that's the string with no fingers on it, we should play that note, should sound like that. Now if it sounds like this, it means that your first finger is probably touching that string. So try and pull your first finger down a little bit until you've got that sound, a nice open string ringing out. Okay, now let's check the 3rd string. Okay, it should sound like that. If it sounds like this, and it's got a kind of all buzzy sound, it means that you're not pressing hard enough. So it might hurt a little bit when you first try and play these chords, but that pain will pass fairly quickly. It just takes a bit of practice. Let's check the 2nd string now. So 3rd finger, it's got to be right up next to the fret again. If it's too far back or you're not pressing hard enough, you're going to have these funny notes coming out. So should be sounding pretty sweet so far. Now let's check the thinnest string. Now it should sound like that, but for about 90% of people when they first try playing this chord, it sounds like this. Okay, and usually it's because the 3rd finger is laying a little bit too flat and is touching the thinner string. So try and get the 3rd finger so you're right on the tip there. If it's too flat, it's going to touch the 1st string. So as you bring it up and get it more pointy, you'll find that you get a good 1st string. So the chord should sound like this. That would be your first chord, the D chord. And remember that you should try not to play the thickest 2 strings. Now let's move on to the next chord, which we're going to check out, which is an E chord. Now an E chord is another nice easy chord. We start off with the 1st finger again on the 3rd string, but we're going to be putting it in the 1st fret this time. So first string, second string, third string, and then getting it nice and close to the fret, just like we did before. Next finger to go down is going to be the second finger, which is going to go down in the second fret of the fifth string. And the third finger is going to go directly underneath in the second fret again on the fourth string. Now with the E chord, we play every note. So we'll be playing the thicker string, the fifth string, fourth string, third string, and the two thinnest open strings. And the last chord that we're going to be looking at today is the A chord. Now A chord again, we start with our first finger exactly the same place that we did for the D chord, so in the second fret of the third string. However, this time you're going to place it back a little bit from the fret, otherwise we're not going to fit the other two fingers in. So start with it in about the middle of the fret as opposed to right next to it. The second finger is going to go down in the second fret of the fourth string, and the third finger is going to go down in the second fret of the second string. If you look at the chord box, you'll see that we don't play the thickest string. So starting from the fifth string, we have the open A string, the open fifth string, the fourth string, third string, second string, and the open thinnest string. The first thing you need to master is actually playing the chords, and you really want to spend a little bit of time going through and playing the chord, picking out the notes one at a time and making sure that every note is as good as that you can possibly make it. However, you're soon going to discover that the hardest part of actually playing guitar is changing between the different chords. Now A, D and E chord are really interesting because they use a thing called an anchor finger. So our first finger doesn't actually need to leave the guitar. So if we start off by looking at a D chord, now if we were going to change to an A chord, we can leave the first finger on the guitar and move our second and third fingers over and be fretting an A chord. You might find that your first finger slides back a little bit, that's fine, but it should essentially be able to stay in touch with the strings. And that's a really helpful thing. So the first thing I'd like you to have a little try is playing a D chord and then seeing if you can swap those fingers over and getting to an A chord. Now the way that I recommend you learn to speed up your chord changes is doing a little game I call 1 minute changes. So you need some sort of countdown timer. You've probably got one on your phone already. So set it for 1 minute. And then what you want to do is try and make as many chord changes as you can within 1 minute and then write down how many you did. And if you do that every day for 1 minute, it'll only be a couple of weeks until you find that you can actually change your chords pretty quickly. And then once you feel ready and you're confident that you can do the change, put your timer on, see how quickly you can get those chord changes going. So the set that we need for the practice routine is changing between D and A, D and E and A. And plenty of 1 minute changes is going to get your chords really fast, real quick.
I think when I first started I played, like I said, a nylon string guitar, and I think they're a lot kinder on the fingers. So that's one tip. And just playing every day, obviously, even for me, I play bass now, so it's a bit, there's bigger strings, but when I don't play, we had some time where we weren't really touring and I didn't play every day, and you just get soft, fingers get soft, and then when you go back to it, it hurts. If you play every day, then it stops hurting after about a week, so you've got to keep playing.
Now before we actually start playing any songs, we need to talk a little bit about rhythm. Now the amount of time that we spend on each individual chord is usually referred to as bars and beats. So in a bar, in most common music, we have 4 beats in a bar. Now I'm sure you've heard people talk about that, like when they're counting in a band going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the band starts. So that's really the 4 beats that you have in one bar. Now what I'm going to talk about to start off with is just the most simple kind of strumming ever. It's just 4 down strums in a bar. A strum is when you play the notes of the chord in one motion, and we're going to start by looking at down strums, and for that you can either use your thumb, your first finger, or a guitar pick. Now I would recommend that you start off with a guitar pick, and if you're going to buy a guitar pick from a store, you want to start off with a really, really thin pick. The one that I really recommend is 0.38 millimeters, and it's extremely flexible. And the idea of having a really flexible pick is it's very forgiving for beginner guitar players. Now, in order to hold your pick, what you want to do is hold out your first finger, put the pick on the side of your finger, and then put your thumb on top of the pick, because what you want at the end is the pick coming out of the side of your thumb. So let's go for a strum now. We're going to put down an E chord, and I'm going to start at the thicker string and move my way through to the thinner string in one motion. Should sound like this. That would be a strum. That's your first strum. Now in a bar, we normally have 4 strums, and we normally count them like 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what I'd recommend that you start getting used to now is counting along and playing and just strumming with your E chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're not going for speed here. What we're going for is consistency. What you don't want is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. It's got to try and be even with the counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If this is your first week playing guitar, I would recommend that you try and find 20 minutes to practice each day. You might find that a little bit too much if your fingers are hurting a lot. If they're really painful, then you need to have a couple of days off. So don't be afraid of having a little break if it really hurts, but expect them to get a little bit sore. Now, from your 20 minutes, what I would recommend is that you spend 5 minutes doing the one note at a time chords. So put down one of the chords that we've just learned and then go through and pick out the notes one at a time and make sure, oh, that one doesn't sound good. Oh, there we go. And normally what I recommend is that you try strumming the chord, pick out the notes one at a time, and then strum again. And then go to the next chord. So just checking that your chords sound really good for 5 minutes, okay? Next thing that you want to be doing is your 1 minute changes, and we've got 3 sets of changes for 1 minute each, so a total of 3 minutes. So get your countdown timer out, set it for 1 minute, and then as fast as you can doing your chord changes between D and A, D and E and A. Then I've allowed 2 minutes to learn the open string names, so that every boy gets dizzy around L, or whatever rhyme it was that you chose, because it's really important that you know the names of the open strings. And then we're left with 10 minutes for working on a song, because it's also really important that you start playing songs straight away. It keeps the guitar playing fun. This practice routine is of course downloadable with the notes that you'll get for this lesson. Hope you've enjoyed it.